Well, General Dynamics has launched the Navy's first Zumwalt-class destroyer. The future USS Zumwalt will be the lead ship of the Navy's newest destroyer.
The USS Zumwalt is 600 feet of stealth. It vanishes on radar. It costs more than an aircraft carrier. It's carrying missiles that can hit targets 6,000 kilometers away, and it runs on a crew of just 142 sailors. What does it feel like to live inside a warship that your enemy can't even see? Not visit, not tour, live, sleep, work, stand watch at 0300 in a sealed steel hull somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. Subscribe now, and let's get started. Before you understand what it's like to live on the Zumwalt, you've got to understand what the Zumwalt is. Most people picture a destroyer, and they think long, gray, conventional. The Zumwalt is none of those things. Its hull is inverted. A tumble-home design that angles inward from the waterline up, almost the opposite of every other warship you've ever seen. That wave-piercing bow cuts through heavy seas differently. The whole silhouette is angular, almost alien. And that's entirely intentional. Every surface is shaped to scatter radar return. A 14,500-ton warship that appears on enemy sensors as something barely worth a second look. It displaces nearly twice what an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer does. It stretches 600 feet from bow to stern, and it runs on an integrated power system, 2 Rolls-Royce MT-30 gas turbines feeding electric generators that power both propulsion and every system on board. There's no mechanical connection between the turbines and the propellers. It's more like a floating power plant that also happens to hit 33 knots. That distinction matters more than it sounds, because everything on this ship, every radar sweep, every weapon system, every light in every passageway runs off that grid, which means the engineers aren't just keeping engines running. They're keeping the ship alive. The crew. Here's the number that surprises most people, 142 on an Arleigh Burke destroyer. You're looking at 280 to 330 sailors. The Zumwalt carries roughly half that on a significantly larger ship. That ratio tells you everything about the design philosophy. More automation, more integrated systems, fewer hands to run them. And that automation goes way deeper than most people picture. On Zumwalt, it isn't just a few smart consoles replacing a few sailors. Raytheon describes the total ship computing environment as a single encrypted network controlling everything from the ship's lights and machinery control to its radars and weapon systems. The electronics are packed into 16 electronic modular enclosures, which replace more than 235 separate cabinets with ruggedized modules built for easier integration and maintenance. That sounds clinical until you think about what it means for the crew. A smaller crew only works if the ship itself is doing more of the organizing, monitoring, and connecting in the background. So when people hear automation and imagine comfort, that's not really the point. The point is compression. Fewer sailors, same warship logic, same consequences if something goes wrong. On Zumwalt, the software is not a convenience layer. It's part of the reason the whole manning concept is even possible. Those 142 people are organized into departments, and understanding that structure is how you understand daily life on board. You've got operations, engineering, combat systems, supply, and administration. Each department has its own chain of command running from enlisted sailors up through petty officers, chief petty officers, and then commissioned officers. At the very top sits the commanding officer, and directly below him the executive officer, who's responsible for the day-to-day functioning of the entire ship. Below the XO, department heads, usually lieutenants or lieutenant commanders, run their respective departments. Under them are division officers managing smaller teams, and beneath them are the chiefs, the chief petty officers, who are arguably the backbone of everything that actually gets done. They're the ones who've been doing this for a decade or more, and the junior sailors know it. For a new sailor reporting aboard, you're at the bottom of that structure, and you feel it. You stand more watches, you take more of the overnight shifts, and you spend a lot of time learning from the people above you. And the Navy knows this ship is too specialized to just teach you everything after you show up. The assignment policy for the class straight up says Zumwalt crews are minimally manned and depend on automation, technical innovation, and tailored procedures, which is why the pipeline starts before you ever report aboard. Sailors headed to the class go through a dedicated shore training component before joining the ship, and the Navy says that process averages about 179 days. That changes the feel of the whole platform. On some ships, you can arrive and grow into the complexity over time. On Zumwalt, the expectation is different. You are supposed to arrive with a real chunk of the learning already behind you because a ship built around reduced manning does not have much patience for passengers. By the time you cross the brow, the system expects you to become useful fast. Getting underway. Getting underway on a ship like this isn't like pulling out of a driveway. A routine departure takes roughly a week of coordination, logistics, systems checks, weapons readiness, and personnel accountability across every department. Even though the ship can be ready to move within 24 hours if required, getting a vessel this complex safely out of a port channel involves the entire crew operating as one organism. Weapons technicians man their stations. Engineering spaces come alive, the gas turbines spool up, and the integrated power system begins feeding electricity to the propulsion motors. The bridge watch team takes their positions, and the conning officer begins a steady flow of orders down to the helmsman. And the helmsman, for all the advanced automation this ship carries, is the one physically making the inputs that turn and accelerate 14,500 tons of warship. There's capacity for steering automation built into the system. The crew doesn't typically use it. Some traditions exist for good reason. Engineering, the heart of everything. If you want to understand life on the Zumwalt, start below decks. The first time you walk into an engineering space on a destroyer, you're not prepared for it. It's loud in a way that gets into your chest. It's hot. And it's bigger than you expected, which is disorienting because you thought you already had a sense of the ship's size from the outside. You didn't. You feel like a small dot moving through the space. On the Zumwalt, each MT-30 turbine produces 35 megawatts of power. 2 main turbines, 2 additional turbine generators, all feeding a single integrated electrical grid that every other department draws from. The gas turbine technicians and electricians' mates essentially split that responsibility. One side produces the power, the other routes it to where it needs to go. They meet in the middle, and the whole ship runs on that handshake. Water is produced on board through reverse osmosis. Seawater passes through filters under high pressure, the salt is forced out, chemicals are added, and what comes out is potable water for drinking, cooking, and showers for the entire crew. Someone checks that system every single hour underway. It's not glamorous work, but miss enough checks and 142 people are without clean water in the middle of the Pacific. Now, you can gauge the ship's speed without looking at an instrument. Just find the shaft that runs all the way back to the stern and watch how fast it's rotating. The engineers know what every RPM feels like. That familiarity, that bone-deep knowledge of the machinery around you is what years in engineering spaces produce. The Combat Information Center. This is what turns a ship into a warship. You don't stumble into the Combat Information Center. Access is controlled, and the transition from the passageway into that space is immediate and total. The lighting drops, your eyes adjust, every console is live, feeding real-time data. Radar contacts, track classifications, communications, weapon status, all of it flowing simultaneously to the watch team inside. The Zumwalt carries the AN/SPY-3 multifunction radar, an X-band phased array system capable of simultaneous air and surface detection at ranges that give the crew meaningful decision time. The watchstanders in here aren't passive. They're pulling information from every sensor on the ship, classifying contacts, and pushing recommendations up the chain to the captain. And because of what this ship now carries, those recommendations carry more weight than on almost any other vessel in the fleet. After a refit completed in late 2024, the Zumwalt's 2 155mm gun systems were removed and replaced with 12 launch tubes for the conventional prompt strike hypersonic missile. Terminal speed exceeding Mach 5, range exceeding 6,000 kilometers. The first warship on Earth configured to launch intercontinental range conventional ballistic strikes. No nuclear warhead required. The sailors in that room are the final human check in a sequence that ends with a weapon that can reach the other side of the planet. Every track on those screens gets assessed. Nothing leaves the ship without the right people in that room making the right calls. And where those weapons sit matters almost as much as what they can do. The Zumwalt's Mark 57 launchers are built into the ship's peripheral vertical launch system, which pushes the launchers out toward the edges of the hull instead of concentrating all that risk in one central block closer to the crew. Raytheon says that layout makes the launchers and missiles more resistant to battle damage and helps isolate them from the crew and shipboard equipment. That gives the whole ship a different internal logic. You're not walking around one giant central danger box. You're living inside a hull whose designers kept trying to move violence outward, away from people, away from critical equipment, away from the center of the ship. On a platform, this stealthy, this automated, and this expensive, that design choice tells you a lot. Even the strike architecture is arranged like the ship expects to get hit and still stay alive long enough to keep fighting. The dim lighting isn't atmospheric, it's functional. It keeps your eyes calibrated to the screens because in here, what you see has to be exactly right. Daily life. You wake up in a rack roughly the size of a coffin with a curtain. Triple-decker bunks are stacked in compartments that house anywhere from 7 to nearly 100 sailors, depending on the space. Your personal area is about 8 by 11 inches, enough for a photo of whoever you're missing most. Hurricane straps keep you from rolling out during heavy seas. An emergency escape breathing device is mounted near your head, good for 15 minutes of clean air if smoke fills the compartment while you're sleeping. The Zumwalt's crew of 142 means slightly more breathing room than on a berth, but the geometry of shipboard life doesn't change much. You learn to move efficiently. You learn where every edge is in the dark, and you discover, usually within the first week underway, that a ship rocking gently beneath you is one of the most effective sleep aids that exists. 3 or 4 hours in that rack, and you wake up more rested than you expected. Watch rotations run around the clock, cycling through every department. You might be on a nocturnal schedule for the entire deployment, sleeping through daylight and working through the night. Without deliberate effort to track time, days start bleeding together. Without paying attention, you'll look up and realize it's been Wednesday for 3 days. The galley operates continuously. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and mid-rats. Midnight rations for whoever's on the overnight watch. On smaller ships, more gets made from scratch, and the crew notices. When the food is genuinely good, morale across the ship moves with it. It's one of the most consistent and underestimated variables in how a crew functions on a long deployment. The gym is small, 2 of them, neither impressive by any standard, outside of the fact that they exist at all on a warship. Treadmills, free weights, cables, all crammed into compartments not built for them. When the ship takes a roll mid-set, the weight gets heavier and lighter in the same movement. You adjust. You have to. And then there's the part of the ship that breaks the sealed steel rhythm for a minute and reminds you this thing still has reach far beyond its own hull. Out aft, Zumwalt has a real helicopter hangar and flight deck, and official Navy and shipbuilder material ties the class directly to aviation missions, with the current Navy fact file listing support for an MH-60R. That matters because flight operations change the whole feel of the ship. Suddenly the routine is not just passageways, consoles, machinery, and berthing. It's deck prep, fueling, tie-downs, aircraft safety, and the burst of rotor noise that cuts through everything else on board. Most of life on Zumwalt happens in enclosed spaces where steel and screens define your whole world. Aviation is one of the few moments where the horizon comes back into the ship's life in a very physical way. You hear it first, then you feel the deck become part of something bigger than the hull. Fitness isn't optional here, and every sailor knows it. When a damage control emergency happens at sea, your body is the only tool that's always available. The sailors who can't keep up physically in those moments don't just put themselves at risk, they put everyone sent to help them at risk too. That understanding is underneath every workout, whether people talk about it or not. The brotherhood. Something specific happens when you spend months at sea with 141 other people in a sealed steel hull. You didn't choose them. You were assigned to this ship, to this department, to this division, and these are the people you got. But somewhere between the shared watches and the 300 passageway conversations and the moment someone covers your station without being asked, those people stop being coworkers. On the Zumwalt, with half the crew of a standard destroyer, that compression happens faster. You know everyone. You know their families, their hometowns, which chief they're trying to impress, and which ones they genuinely respect. You know who's going to step up in an emergency before the emergency happens. The engineers rely on combat systems. Combat systems rely on engineering. Supply keeps everyone fed. Medical keeps everyone functional. Administration keeps everyone paid and accounted for. Every department feeds every other one, and the whole chain holds because it has to. There is no standing on the sidelines on a ship with 142 people and a mission this serious. For most people, The Zumwalt is a headline, a radical silhouette, a staggering price tag. The world's first destroyer armed with intercontinental hypersonic missiles. But for 142 sailors, it's Tuesday. And when you're somewhere in the middle of the Pacific carrying the most advanced conventional strike capability any surface warship has ever fielded, you don't really need anyone to remind you why. You're there. You already know.